Hello, Emberfest. So yes, I'm gonna be talking about the EmberData, what happened in the version 5 and the next, what the future awaits us, what the new era of the backend integration holds for us. So my name is Kirill, I'm working as a consultant at Galar, and I've been using Ember for a while. I remember the times, like Ricardo told us about the first Ember CLI release when I was refactoring the views into the templates, when I was optimizing the keys for the computed properties. Who remember these old days, huh? And yeah, I also love doing the pet projects. I'm trying to make it easier for people to do something real quick in the weekend time. So that's what we're gonna be talking about here. But also life sometimes catch up. In 2020, I had to move to another country. In 2021, I became a father. So let's say I did not do a lot of the open source, and I was not falling in love with what the RFCs are and what is the new in Ember. So let's try to see what happens in the EmberData, and I'll bring you on with me. So the integration on the PocketBase example, or in the other words, what you can do if you couldn't convince your backend people to write JSON API endpoints. The main motivation was to get up with RFCs, set up the good foundation for the people to do weekend projects with a PocketBase as a backend. So we're going to be talking about what is the PocketBase, how do we integrate it with EmberData right now, what is the new way of integration with EmberData. A little bit about the PocketBase. It's an open source backend in one file. It's a Go server. It comes with a real-time database, with authentication, with file storage, with admin dashboard. It's extendable. It has a nice marketing website. It has a good minimalistic admin dashboard. And it says that it integrates nicely with your favorite front-end framework, but I don't see Ember here. It's cheating a little bit because what they provide is just a JavaScript SDK, so why just don't use it? I really don't like using the specific SDKs. In this example, PocketBase will you just need to use the PocketBase style of the API to get any data you want. And I don't want to pollute my application code with some random SDK. There should be a better way, right? And we have this abstraction. It's called EmberData. So what do we need to integrate with PocketBase and EmberData? First, let's quickly touch on the authentication, and then let's talk about the EmberData configuration. Authentication is pretty much done deal with, in the Ember project, you usually install Ember simple auth, but in this case, it's kind of like non-standard API. So what you can do is just use some of the default authenticators on the Ember simple auth. I used the device because it was like REST API-like, so it was pretty easy to configure. All you need to do is specify properties, how to get your token from the server, and you change the payload shape. How do you want to send the data to the server? And that's it. Authentication is done. Let's move to the old world we live right now with the EmberData. So to configure any custom API, what you need to do is to most likely change adapter pass for type. Then you change serializer normalize method. Then you change serializer serialize method. And then you just use EmberData across your application, never worrying about how the API responses look like. So I think pretty much everyone has some kind of application adapter looking like that. You set up host and namespace from the configuration. You get the headers object fulfilled with the authorization token. And yeah, the only thing different here is we extend the PocketBase adapter. PocketBase adapter is just JSON API adapter with overwritten pass for type. The PocketBase expects you to make a query to collection/collection name and records. Collection name is, in our case, is pluralized camel-cased type of the model. So for the user, you go to the collection users records and so on. On the serializer, we need to override normalized response and serialize. Let's look at the serialize. We just need to convert the data from the store to the PocketBase format expected. PocketBase expects you to have every field on the flat on the object. Every relationship is just an IDs. So using the snapshot, we can get what the attributes are, what the relationships are, and just put it on the object. Next, let's quickly look how do we convert data from PocketBase to the JSON API, because EmberData expects you from you JSON API object. PocketBase, in terms of if it's query request, it will send you the items and the metadata on object. But if it was a single find record request, it will be just an object with properties. So we quickly extract the metadata from the root of the object. We convert the type. Important point here, from some time ago, the EmberData expects you singularize the collection name. So it should match the file name of the model you have specified. And to serialize resource, we just use the schema. We get the schema attributes, and for each attribute, we pick it from the payload. Same with relationships. We just need to do a little bit more work to construct the relationship object on the data. And then we use it, right? So we just do the store find record or just query example, anything here, and it just works, right? So why do we need to change it, right? It works. There are a lot of problems with adapter serializers. Main point is missing the context on the serialize. So people, as Chris said it, many people was doing ejects, workarounds, frustration, and the stories of abandoning EmberData were tied to the limited power of adapter serializer approach. So he started doing something with it, right? So this is his quote. In 2013, he started thinking how to refactor the EmberData internals to be more flexible. Here on the Emberfest in 2019, he showed us the project dream. He outlined the steps we need to do to make EmberData more flexible and usable for everyone. So let's take a look what the brand new world have for us and how do we get them. First, we would need to define store service in our application. We would need to configure request manager. We would need to set the handlers we want to use, and we're going to be using builders to build the proper request in our application. Here is the little diagram of the architecture that we're going to be using. I picked this one. It most resembles what default EmberData behavior would be. So you have a store, you have a cache to it attached, you have the request manager configures, and there is some default handlers that make a request to the database and get the data for you. So let's look closely at the store service, right? Here is the example of the store service. The main points here is you have the request manager service. You register the schema. Schema comes from EmberData models that you have in the application. So we just use the hook from the EmberData model hooks and register the schema. Instantiate record, tear down record, model 4. This all comes from the EmberData model hooks. And then you set the cache. It's important to note here because it's a little bit boilerplatey, but in the future it will be generated for you when you do install EmberData, so don't worry about this too much. Let's take a closer look at the cache. So cache is cache instantiated here on the service create cache method. And take a look that we using the default EmberData JSON API cache. So it will be the closest possible as we have in default EmberData. Let's talk about the request manager. Request manager is the abstraction that deals with the request. What we have here is what you need to do is to define the handlers pipeline. So you call this use, and you pass the array of the handlers that you're going to use. You can provide any number of handlers. The fetch one is the default one. You use it for, you import default fetch handler, and this must be the last one because it makes the call to the server. Also notice that we have this that use cache handler. Because we set up cache for the store, we need to attach the cache handler to the request manager. Let's take a look at the handlers pipeline, right? So this is how the pipeline looks like in our example here. First would be cache handler, then us, PocketBase, and fetch handlers. Important thing here is handlers pipeline flows like a wave, so from the first to the last one, and then comes back. The handoff point here is await next. Not every handler needs to await for the next, but if you await, then you will, your execution will be brought back with the results of the handlers that defined next to you, next after your handler, and it will be set in the context. So let's look at the aus handler. It's pretty much similar like we had with the adapter headers. We need to enrich the headers of the request object to append the aus token. Headers are immutable, request also immutable. So we just create the new headers object, append the authorization header here. We create the new request object from the previous one with new headers, and then we just return next. So we don't wait for result of the next handlers. We just said we done our job here. We just go over. PocketBase handler. This is the main integration key point. It handles pretty much everything that serializer was doing. So first, we need to check if the operation of the request is a mutation. If it's a mutation, we need to get the record from the cache and attach the body to the request, right? So the post or patch request will go with the proper body setup. And then let's have a look. So convert to the PocketBase is similar what it used to be on the serializer, but we deal with a different concept here. We have identifier and we have a cache. The identifier is a unique ID for any record in the store, in the cache, and the request. It's same across the whole of EmberData, and it's useful to identify the record anywhere. So with this identifier, we can check on the cache if we have some changed attributes. We pick the changed attributes. If we have changed relationship, we pick the change relationship from the cache, and then just convert to the flat object that PocketBase expects from us. Then we make a request with the data, with the request object, and we wait for the response. Because we need to convert response back to the JSON API object, so it would be processed correctly by the EmberData store and cache. Let's take a look how we do it here. In this case, we use the schema, and schema is built from the models, but in the future we will have a separate concept for the schemas. Please pay attention to the RFCs. But it has the similar concepts, right? So what we do here, we check the content, we extract the meta, and then we normalize response. From the schema, by identifier, we get the attributes definition for and relationship definition for. And then we process these maps and get the values on the data object, right? This is all good. It's a little bit different as it used to be, but it's still pretty much acceptable, right? But the handlers as a concept can do much more. You have the full power of control on the request. So here is the example of the retry handler. This is kind of like a interesting popular feature of the 10-stack query and stuff. So they do retry of the requested timeouts, and we can implement a similar exponential backup strategy for the timeouted request. So let's check 3 times the server if we're gonna get the result, or if it's error, just throw an error. Another interesting conceptual idea for the handler is the side loading. Let's say your server doesn't support includes, and you made the request for the user. You await for the request, and then you parse the payload, and you see, oh, wait, I have the friends' IDs. So let me create a new request for this specific friends, wait for the response, and put everything together in the single JSON API object and return to the store. So on the application level code, you still deal with just, okay, let's query for the user, and you pass in as an option, include the friends, but your backend doesn't support it, and you deal with it in the handler. Yes. So let's go back to the general architecture. We take a look at each of the points here. We configured our EmberData for specific needs of our project. We spend a lot of time configuring, right? How do we use it? We configured everything. So to use it, we need to customize request builders and make a request. Request builder is another new concept. It just provides you a nice API to use to construct the similar to fetch-like request object, and it just has some EmberData options on it. EmberData will provide you with default builders for JSON API, REST, and active record. It's typical builders: find record, query, create, update, delete records. And let's take a look how they looks, right? So you just use it, you import the find record, and let's see the results. So find record of Ember developer. Here is the first object is identifier. You can pass the name of the model, but maybe better would be to pass as an object with type Ember developer. Second is ID, and then as the options you say, hey, include me pets and friends. And as a result, you can see there is a fetch-like request object. It has a proper URL constructed for you, has a method get, headers, opcode. It's specific for EmberData to track what's going on the request. It's find record in this case, and the record is the identifier of the record that you requested. So it will be passed as the initial context of the request manager pipeline. So let's configure the builders to talk to the PocketBase, right? As we used to do in adapter, we can just do it anyway in our application. We set default build, we set build URL config from request utils. We set the host and namespace, and let's see how we use it, right? So we can modify. So here is the example. I'm importing default REST builder, and then I append the option of resource path. So I modify the default REST builder, I attach the resource path, and export it for my application needs. So I don't need to configure response paths everywhere in the app. I just import my utils. And in the application, I import it from the PocketBase builders, and let's see, the user request would be this does stored request, find record of user with user ID, or query request looks pretty much similar. So let's quickly recap. This is the new APIs of the EmberData, the store server service, the request manager, handlers, and builders. And you may say it's a new edition of EmberData, and you might be true, but it's all available right now. With the recent release a few days ago, We work hard with Chris to make it happen, and you can just install EmberData, get any script you've seen on the slides, try it out. It should work. If it's not, file an issue, but it will work, I promise. As usual, you've seen the talk on how to do the guides and documentation. Please help us there as well. It's all new. When I started the talk, working on the talk, I had to implement and document most of the parts here, and with giant help from the Chris, we made it happen. So big thank you, Chris. That's not it. I have one more thing for you. What if I told you that you can avoid dealing with serialization, deserialization, writing the handler, just by creating your own cache? There is a big RFC 0854 for the cache. It outlines nicely the cache interface that you can implement, and then EmberData will work natively with your backend. So even if it's not JSON API, you can use GraphQL, you can use REST, you can use PocketBase. You just need to implement your cache, and that's all. I think it might be a topic of my next talk, or at least the blog post. So I'll work on the documentation, and I just want to say thank you, everyone, for listening. I want to say thank you to the Chris, to my friends and family for support. And that's all. Thank you, guys.